tell me if this happens to you. You get into a conversation on abortion and you're telling your friends the facts, that they just had no idea that abortion is legal up until birth, that even if babies survive their abortion, they can be left to die in certain states. And you go through the methods and maybe you show them a procedure video and their minds are blown by how gross it is. But then they invariably come back to you with this, which is, Joe, I agree with you, this is really horrible, but I'm worried that, if we ban late-term abortion, women are going to die. And the reason they think this is because of the media lies and the lies that go right up to the top, even to the United Nations. And so we're going to talk about that today. We're going to expose it so that you know the truth, you can tell them the truth. And that's today on The Dr. Joe Show. Thank you for joining us today. If you are new here, can I please ask that you subscribe? If you're a returning viewer and haven't subscribed, please make sure you've subscribed. It really helps our channel grow and reach more people. So the reason I thought I'd talk about this episode is because one of my Instagram followers DM'd me and she shared with me this post, and it's about the tragic case of Isabella, a 30-year-old in Poland who tragically lost her life. Now, the media narrative around this is that she lost her life because she couldn't get an abortion. And I'm going to show you the post that was put up by Hear Her Stories. It's a propaganda Instagram account, but it has a big following. It's got nearly 250,000 followers. And on this particular post, it's reached a huge amount of people. It's been liked over 7,500 times, DM'd to another 800 people. And it's this kind of propaganda that you see not just on social media, but also repeated in the mainstream media. And in fact, at the end of this carousel post, they cite the mainstream media as the sources for the claims that they make in this post. So the first slide says, Isabella was 22 weeks pregnant. She was denied life-saving care because doctors feared breaking Poland's abortion law. She died in a hospital bed, a tragedy now sending shockwaves across Europe. If you scroll through, the next slide says, Isabella's death, a nation's breaking point. In September 2021, 30-year-old Isabella from Poland was 22 weeks pregnant when her water broke. Under Poland's near-total abortion ban, her doctors refused to terminate the pregnancy while the fetus's heart was still beating, fearing criminal charges. For hours they waited. By that time, the fetus died. Isabella had developed sepsis. She died later that day, leaving behind her husband and young daughter. Her final text to her mother read, "They can't do anything. They have to wait for the baby to die." The court ruling is the next slide, and it says, in July 2025, 2 doctors were sentenced to over a year in prison without parole, and the third received a 2-year suspended sentence. They were convicted of neglecting their duty and exposing Isabella's life to danger. The next slide. This case is not isolated. Poland's near-total abortion ban, expanded in 2020 to remove fetal abnormalities as legal grounds, has created a chilling effect. Doctors fear legal consequences more than they fear losing lives. Multiple women have died from sepsis after being denied care. And then they've got their sources, AP News, Politico and Time magazine. Notably, none of them are original primary sources. And that's what we're going to do in this episode, is actually go to the facts, because if you're just relying on mainstream media propaganda websites that have an embedded pro-abortion position, you're not getting the facts on this stuff. And Hear Her Stories has just used propaganda websites. They're a propaganda organisation themselves. And all of this is actually obscuring the truth. Now, there's a red flag already in it. I'm not sure if you caught it, but let's just see if you did. So on the third slide of the carousel, it says the court ruling that the 2 doctors in Isabella's case were actually sentenced to jail, a year in prison without parole, and the third received a 2-year suspended sentence. Now, the whole premise of this carousel is that these doctors were so afraid of breaking the law that in giving her an abortion, and that's why they didn't intervene. That's why they didn't give her an abortion. But then the thing is this, guys, it doesn't add up, does it? Even at this basic level, we're going to go through the primary sources in a minute, but just stay with me. Even at this very basic level, there should be a big red light going off in your head, a big alarm sort of flashing, because if these doctors were following Poland's so-called restrictive abortion laws, which is what Hear Her Story says they are, if Poland really does have a near total ban on abortion and these doctors were merely following the law, then why are they in jail? Like, how does that add up? Because if they were following the law, then the courts apply the law. And even if she has died, if they were following the law, they wouldn't be in jail. Instead, a court found that they were guilty of medical malpractice and negligence because they hadn't followed the law, because they hadn't satisfied their ethical and legal obligations as a doctor. Now, that isn't in this propaganda piece, and we're going to explain why and how we know this to be true through looking at the actual reports that were done at the time. This is just shameless lying and dog whistling by pro-abortion organisations seeking to lie to women and whip them up into hysteria, and it's effective. Like, look at these comments on this. I literally just had a woman tell me that abortion isn't healthcare. How the fuck isn't it healthcare? And how can anyone hear cases like this and still say that stuff? And it's been liked 547 times. And did the baby survive? No, but who cares? If the mother dies, that is not pro-life. That's 268 times. Another person's written, Savita Halapanova died in similar circumstances in Ireland in 2012. She changed Irish laws almost immediately. I can't understand why the worst case scenario has to actually happen before people realise that it can. So you can see what happens. All these people who have liked that comment and who've made the comment in the first place, they've looked at this carousel post and they've seen this situation. They've seen a woman tragically die, leaving a husband and young child behind, and they are like, well, an abortion would have saved her life. And one person even references the case of Savita Halapanova. Now, she was a lady in Ireland who also developed sepsis, and her baby died. She died. It was a total double tragedy. But the court found in that case, similar to they found in this case, that wasn't because of an abortion ban in Ireland. That was because of medical negligence. The doctors in that case took too long. They were not monitoring her blood pressure. They were not doing her obs, and they were leaving her with too long a gap, to the point that she then developed sepsis and died. And they should have picked that up earlier. And the court said that wasn't because of the abortion ban. It was because of medical malpractice. And that was the case in Ireland. But the abortion activists used that case. They weaponized it so effectively. And what happens in these circumstances is sometimes the family themselves, they're looking for answers. They're really upset. They blame it on abortion laws. And so, the abortion activists use that. They use the tragedy to say, well, abortion needs to be legal up until birth for any reason because women are going to die. So they did that in Ireland and it worked. Now they're trying to do it in Poland, and they're trying to use the case of Isabella to do it. Now, in my view, Poland has one of the best abortion laws in the world. And in Poland, you can't get an abortion unless it's to save the life or the health of the mother. And prior to 12 weeks, you can get an abortion in cases of rape and incest, but a prosecutor has to have signed off that there is sufficient evidence that something like that has occurred. So it doesn't have to have actually been proven in a criminal trial, but there has to be some process in order to get that abortion for rape or incest. Now, prior to very recently, so prior to 2021, in Poland, you could also have an abortion if the baby was disabled. And if we look at the numbers in Poland, it's actually just really interesting to see some data by reason. So before the law was changed, in 2020, we can see that there were 21 abortions where the pregnancy was a threat to the pregnant woman's life or health. There were 2 abortions because of rape or incest, because there was a reasonable suspicion that the pregnancy was a result of a prohibited act. And then there were 1,053 abortions that killed babies because they were disabled. Now, after that point, Poland actually changed the law, so they removed the ability to kill a baby based on eugenics, based on the fact that they are disabled. And so in 2022, we see these numbers shift really dramatically. There's one baby killed because of a reasonable suspicion that the pregnancy was the result of rape or incest. There's 159 babies killed. The pregnancies ended because of a threat to the woman's health or life. So we can see that number starting to rise. And 0 abortions because of fetal anomaly, because of disability. And then in 2023, we see that the number of abortions because of a threat to the woman's life or health is 423, 0 for disability, and 2 because of rape or incest. So what we can already see is this is a significantly lower rate of abortion than in almost any other comparable country like the UK or the US or Australia, which allows abortion up to birth for any reason. You can see that in Poland, there are many more babies being saved because of this law. Now, in Isabella's case, her baby, ultrasound scans had revealed, was under significant threat. There was an issue. There was potential issues of abnormality. There wasn't enough amniotic fluid. And indeed, at 22 weeks, her waters broke and she was rushed to hospital. Now, at that point, I guess there's a decision to make. Now, according to the United Nations and all of these media organisations who are saying if she had an abortion, she would have survived, what they're essentially saying is that if her baby had been killed and the pregnancy ended, she would have lived. Now, nobody actually knows that's true because even after abortion, you can go sepsis. But what happened in Isabella's case is she presents at the hospital and the baby's heart is still beating. And that also happened in Savita's case in Ireland. And you see it in a couple of these cases that the media then reports as being about abortion when they're not about abortion. Because in this case where her waters are broken but the baby's heart is beating, what should have happened is they should have been monitoring her and they should have done a separation, an early delivery. In fact, in the case of Leah Darrow, who I've talked about many times before, she similarly last year in the US, she was rushed to hospital. Her waters had broken. She was clearly in danger. Her life was at risk. Her baby's life was also in the balance. And so what they did was they rushed her to emergency. They did a C-section with an emergency cesarean. You can remove the baby in a couple of minutes. So like literally in less than an hour from woe to go, that baby can be removed and the pregnancy ended. At that point, care can be given to the baby and care can be given to the mother. And in Leah Darrow's case, her little baby Sly was rushed to the NICU. He was on a lot of medication. He had a lot of wires and tubes linked up to him. He was really in the balance. And, thankfully today, miraculously today, he has survived. And it really depends on the quality of neonatal care as to whether a baby is going to survive at that gestation. There's a Japanese study and this was of babies with no fetal anomalies, but they actually show that at 22 weeks, there was, I think, over 80%, I think it was 88% survival rates for those extremely premature babies. But Japan has one of the best facilities in the world for neonatal care. I don't know what the quality of the care is in Poland, but what should have happened to Isabella at 22 weeks is not to keep her there in this incredibly dangerous situation as her sepsis is developing, but to have done an emergency C-section and to have removed the baby. They didn't need to kill the baby first. In fact, killing the baby first would have taken more time and been more dangerous to her. They would have just removed the baby, given care to Isabella. She would be alive today, and then given care to her baby. Now her baby might be alive today, or her baby might have died after birth. But the thing is, there wouldn't have been a direct intentional killing of that baby's life. So something that Apolog says in their practice guideline, so they've got a guideline about concluding pregnancy ethically, and they speak to the fact that it is totally possible in these situations to separate the mother and child in a way that respects both of them. Now, when you've got a baby that's on the threshold of viability, this is certainly something that can be done. And the contrast to it is to do a late-term abortion. So all of these activists, who are saying she needed an abortion, what are they really saying? Because an abortion at this gestation actually requires a doctor to locate the left ventricle of the baby's heart, to put the mum under local anaesthetic, to find the left ventricle of the heart, to inject it with poison, and then to deliver that baby. The mum delivers that baby early and dead. Now, that wouldn't have saved Isabella's life. An abortion would not have saved Isabella's life at this point. Any efforts to directly kill this baby at 22 weeks would not have saved her life. She would still be dead today because that process takes up to 72 hours because you've got to prime the cervix, you've got to do the injection, and then you've got to deliver. The only medical solution for Isabella at this point would have been to separate her from her baby, to terminate her pregnancy without killing the baby via a C-section. That's what happened to Leah Darrow, and it would have benefited Isabella here. It would have saved her life. And so when all of these news stories say, well, she needed an abortion, they are just lying to suit their propaganda campaign. Isabella has to give birth anyway. She has to remove this baby from her in order to end this pregnancy. It has to be removed. And so the only question here is the baby removed quickly and alive, which is the best case scenario for Isabella because then she can be treated, or is it through a long-winded, painstaking late-term abortion that threatens her life in the process because it takes 1 to 3 days? In what way would the baby being dead save Isabella's life? Can someone please explain that to me and put it in the comments? The second point that never gets mentioned here in any of these cases is that there's no pro-life law in the world. There's no country in the world that says you can't do an emergency intervention to save the mother's life. And in fact, Poland's law is more expansive than most. It says that you can do any medical intervention on a pregnant woman in order to save her life or protect her health. And indeed, the government of Poland makes clear that in order to determine the existence of circumstances in which the pregnancy threatens the woman's life or health, only one medical certificate is required. And it can't be that hard to get a late-term abortion in Poland because, for example, we've got 423 women in 2023 whose lives were at risk and the doctors intervened. So in this situation where the pro-abortion media establishment is making this about the fact that Poland, in their words, has a near total abortion ban, there's just no basis for that. But they whip up this hysteria because this whole thing is based on fear and lies. The UN is in on it too. And so they sent some investigators over to Poland to do a report. And they said, the committee concluded in its report that the current legislation which prevents women from exercising their reproductive choice, forces them to carry pregnancies to term, endangers their health and life, or subjects them to hostile and burdensome procedures, resulting in mental and physical suffering that constitutes gender-based violence against women. It may also constitute torture or cruel, inhumane and degrading treatment in violation of several articles of the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women. So this is a heavily biased pro-abortion committee that's, the UN now it's not what it was in 1945 when, we had the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. After World War II, there was recognition, widespread recognition that when you carve out one member of one group of humanity and say that they are subhuman and therefore can be gassed and killed, that is just where the worst atrocities come from. And so, the preamble of the the Universal Declaration of Human Rights clearly says that all members of the human family are subject to the protection of that declaration. And, here, the drafters of that would be rolling in their grave to see this report by the committee in 2025, which says that, there needs to be reproductive choice because we should be able to kill babies because of that choice. That's essentially what this committee is saying. They're criticising Poland because they're saying that this forces women to carry their pregnancies to term. It endanger their health and life. So they're perpetuating the lie when there's actually a clear carve-out in Poland abortion law which says that if the woman's life or health is in danger, then she can have an abortion. The Dublin Declaration on Maternal Health Care, issued on the 8th of September 2012, makes this really clear. This was signed by thousands of obstetricians, gynecologists and healthcare professionals, and it asserts that abortion is never necessary to save the life of the mother. So what they say is, as experienced practitioners and researchers in obstetrics and gynecology, we affirm that direct abortion, the purposeful destruction of the unborn child, is not medically necessary to save the life of a woman. We uphold that there is a fundamental difference between abortion and necessary medical treatments that are carried out to save the life of the mother, even if such treatment results in the loss of her life of her unborn child. We confirm that the prohibition of abortion does not affect in any way the availability of optimal care to pregnant women. So in this situation, Isabella, when her waters broke and it was clear that things were going south for her, that pregnancy should have been ended. The way it should have been ended was through an emergency C-section, like it was done for Leah Darrow. And in that situation, the baby would have received care and the baby might have tragically passed, but no one set out to kill that baby, so there was no abortion. And Isabella would be alive today because her infection would have been treated. And that's why these people are so reprehensible, because they would rather obscure the truth. They would rather it not get out that the correct solution for Isabella was a separation of her pregnancy and early delivery. They would rather that didn't get out, and they would rather make this about abortion so that they can whip up this hysteria and this and this fear so that they can get abortion up to birth for any reason. That's what they're fighting for. They would rather the truth didn't get out because they have a political agenda and this suits their narrative that women are dying because of pro-life laws. And the reason this is really bad is because we actually need this information to get out in order to save women's lives when they're in this situation. If doctors are confused about what sort of treatment they've got to do in these situations, that's a problem. The fact that these doctors in Isabella's and Savita's situation didn't know that they could have given her the same care that Leodara received, which is to end the pregnancy early and deliver that baby alive and then give care to the mother and the baby. The fact that they didn't see that as an option, or they waited too long, or they didn't understand how to treat sepsis, that is a major concern. But these pro-abortion media outlets would rather lie to women than save women, because getting the truth out there would actually save women. And, Dr. Levatino, who's an OBGYN from the US, and he's cared for hundreds of women with severe pregnancy complications, and he talks about this sort of situation. He says that a late-term abortion is entirely inappropriate in an emergency case because it can take 24 to 72 hours to prepare the cervix for the abortion, which is too long for a woman facing a dire medical emergency. And he says that in high-risk situations in his practice, he delivers the baby either by induction or cesarean section delivery, and where a pregnancy is endangering the life of the mother, the priority is to separate the mother and the baby and to do everything within the physician's power to save the lives of both patients. Such an approach that he takes, and was obviously the treatment that Leah received in her case, that's the approach that saves women's lives, and it doesn't directly intentionally kill their preborn child. So all of this to say, there is just so much frustration that I have that these lies are perpetuating on social media, in the mainstream media, that to actually find out the truth, you have to find the medical reports, the tribunal investigations. You really have to do some digging, like I and the team have done, in order to prepare this episode for you. And that's why it's so important that we actually get this out there. So share this episode, make sure you understand it, because it is really important that you know that abortion up to birth is never needed to save a woman's life. That is just pure propaganda. Thank you for watching, and that's today on The Dr. Jo Show.